Hello everyone, welcome to webdev live India day 2. My name is Hiren. I am working as a chief technology officer and I am the co-organizer of GDG Ahmedabad. Today my session is about amplifying your web applications. This is our session agenda. We will start with introduction to AMP. Then we will see difference between AMP and PWA because this is very important as both the AMP and PWA is meant for performance enhancement. So as a developer, we should know when to use AMP and when to use PWA. The third topic will be demystifying the AMP, where we will see the latest component of the AMP and all the three major component of the AMP. Then we will see how actually you can amplify your web apps, where I will show you how you can build your AMP page from the scratch, as well as how you can convert your existing web application or HTML pages to AMP page. And at the last, we will see some of the AMP component available in the catalog, so you can know when to use which component. Now let's start with the introduction of AMP. AMP, the full form of the AMP is Accelerated Mobile Pages. It is an open source project launched by Google to ensure that mobile web pages operate at the optimal speed. The goals of AMP is to build the future of web together and to build the blazing fast web pages, ads, newsletters, stories, and emails. We will see this in detail in the other AMP session, which is scheduled today. And it is meant for consistent and high performance across all the platforms. It doesn't matter if you are running your website over the web desktop or over the tablet or over the phone. AMP is meant for providing high performance and consistent layout across the platforms. This is what you will get with AMP. You will get a very reduced load time because AMP is using a cache and a lot of other mechanism for loading your web page very faster. You will get a very low bounce rate because your web page is working so smooth and so faster that your users and customers will stay on the page. Let me just quickly introduce quickly tell you what is the bounce rate. Bounce rate is like someone comes to your web application or website and due to high loading time or due to some issues, they just don't visit or don't stay on your website and just leave it like that. But when you convert your application to AMP, it is drastically reducing your load time so that your users will stay on your application. So that will be a low bounce rate. You will get an enhanced ACO because AMP has an inbuilt ACO tags and everything. It is mobile friendly because it has a lot of layouts and because this mobile normally has the low network and we normally face low network issues on the mobile, but because AMP is using cache and all, it is very mobile friendly. And at the last, as we have seen, AMP will give you high performance web pages across all platforms. These web pages are very smooth to load, very fast, and it is using a cache, so it will load like in very fraction of seconds or in fraction of minute. Okay, now we all know that there is PWA already in the market, the progressive web application. It is doing the same thing, that it is creating the high performance web applications. It is creating web applications which loads very fast. It has user engagement and everything. So why should we go for AMP? So here I have created a brief comparison between AMP and PWA. So it is very clear to you when to use AMP and PWA. So let's see this bit in the structure first. First, let's see what is AMP. So as we know, it is an open source platform created on JavaScript for faster page loading than the other HTML. On the contrary, PWA, it is a kind of a mobile web that gives you native look and feel with the high performance. What does it have? AMP has a streamlined CSS, standardized JavaScript and components, where PWA is created of service worker, app cell, and app manifest. What does AMP do? AMP reduces your page load time and increases the speed. On the other side, PWA enables the rich user experience and increases the user engagement with features like push notifications. Now, when to use AMP? AMP is particularly suitable when you want to deliver a static content. So static content is like, let's say your ads or your newsletter or any other images or any other image gallery or something which is kind of a static content which you want to just deliver to your users. So that's where you should go for AMP. And PWA is best suited for the web apps, and it is recommended for secure HTTP web apps. So as we know that PWA does not work without HTTPS. So HTTPS is very important for web for the PWA. So whenever you want to have a secure web application, you should go for PWA. And the engagement rate for the PWA is higher because it has features like push notifications. So you can interact with user later on as well when your user has gone off from your PWA, but still you can engage with them through push notifications. So that is where user engagement rate is higher compared to AMP. But this will give you a clear-cut idea when to use AMP and when to use PWA. So in a summary, if you want to just deliver the static content and you want to have the high performance website that loads in a fraction of seconds, you should go for AMP. On the other side, when you want to have a native look and feel like web apps and you want to have a high engagement factor for your end user, you should go for PWA. And PWA is a secure, PWA is on working on the HTTPS, so it is a secure platform. Now, now let's demystify AMP. Here we will see what is the main component of AMP and what are the main what are the building blocks of the AMP. The first is there are three core components of AMP. One is the AMP HTML, second is AMP JavaScript, and third is AMP Cache. Now let's see one by one. First, let us understand what is AMP HTML. So AMP HTML is nothing but just it's HTML tag only, but it has some restriction for better performance. It has AMP specific tags, which is called AMP HTML component. All your existing browser like Google Chrome, it will render it as a normal HTML. And for AMP, there is no specific configurations required on the server. So it is purely on the client side. So AMP HTML is nothing but you can say is an extension of HTML. And it is just using the same tag like HTML, but it has a specific tags. We will see what are the what all AMP tags are available. So this is what it will look like. So this is what it will look like. The plain AMP page. It begins with HTML. It begins with HTML tag. It has head, it has meta, title, link, but as you can see, the top HTML tag where you can see little lightning symbol. So that specifies that it is the HTML AMP tag. This is the lightning symbol you can use, or you can use HTML AMP as the start tag. So this is the normal AMP tag, and this is the plain and very simple HTML page. Just for your example, we will see in detail what all tags and what all prerequisites are there for creating the AMP page. Now second, what is AMP JavaScript? So AMP JavaScript, it ensures the fast rendering of AMP HTML. It makes external resources asynchronous. It provides custom HTML tags for the fast rendering. It disables all the slow CSS selector, and it implements inline CSS and font triggering. Now let's understand it in bit detail. Why it makes everything asynchronous? We all know that when we are using JavaScript heavily in our web application, and if there is some issue with JavaScript, or if there is any error, it stops your execution over there. So that's why AMP JavaScript ensures that all your resources are loading asynchronously, so that if there is an issue, it does not block the loading of your page, but it will still load. In AMP, you can use external JavaScript as well, but you cannot use directly with the normal script tag. There is a specific tag which you have to use. We will see it in detail in later slides. It disables slow CSS selectors because all we know that CSS can drastically slow down your app performance. So what AMP JavaScript do is that it disables all that slow CSS selector, which can disable your app performance. And it implements inline CSS because as we all know that if we are using CSS from a third-party page or some third-party script, it will load the CSS and then it will apply the CSS and then your layout changes, and it is all very very time consuming activities. So what AMP does is that, so there's a prerequisite for creating the AMP page, which is you have to implement all CSS inline. And it implements the font triggering because font loading is also a very very time consuming operation. If you are using any third party font in your application, it will load the font and then accordingly it will adjust the layout and so many things. So that is also a time consuming process. So what AMP JavaScript do is that it implements the inline CSS and the font triggering. And one point which I would like to mention is that AMP JavaScript takes care of your layout as well. So in your application, if your layouts are changing frequently, let's say your browser is resizing or any other thing, at the time it is very very difficult for application because it changes the layout frequently. So all your DOM is re-rendered and there are a lot of heavy operations involved in that. So what AMP ensures is, it restrict your layout, and it provides rendering in a such a way that your layout changes are not frequent, and that way your application is performing well. So this is all about AMP JavaScript. Now let's see what is AMP cache. As we understood in as we understood earlier that AMP is using Google Cache, and Google Cache identifies all your AMP pages. So there are validators for the AMP pages, and when Google Cache sees that there is an AMP page, it will cache it, and next time whenever it is required, it will serve the page from the cache and not from the original file. So that way it will drastically increase your web performance, because all of your pages is coming from the cache. So that way it increases the performance. And AMP cache has built-in validations, as we know that it makes sure that your AMP page works. So whenever you are creating an AMP page, you can use this validator to make sure that your page is compliant with all AMP restrictions and everything. If there is some issue, this validator will show an error, and then you can rectify. You can first rectify it, and then you can again validate it, so that you make sure that your AMP page works fine. It is cached, and it can be served over the cache, and then it is loading in very high speed. So this is about AMP cache. Okay, now let's move to the third section, which is actually amplifying your web apps. Here, first of all, we will see if you have to build a new AMP page from the scratch, what exactly you should do. These are some list I have mentioned over here, which is the must-haves for your AMP HTML page. The first is it should start with doc type HTML. This is very very required. If you have not specified this, then validator will give you an error. So that this is the foremost requirement. Second is the top level tag of your HTML should be HTML AMP, so that Google Cache can identify this as an AMP page, and the other content inside that will also be considered as an AMP tag, and it will be rendered particularly. So this is the second most requirement to create an AMP page, that your top level tag should be HTML AMP. It should have head and body tags. In normal HTML, if you don't specify, sometimes don't specify head and body tag, it will work. However, according to the W3 standard, it is not good. But then normally, sometimes when it is skipped, still it will work. But when you are building an AMP page, this is very much required. If you skip head or body tag, it will not work. It will give you an error. The first child of head should be meta char set, which should specify UTF-8 encoding. So again, this is a prerequisite for AMP. The fifth point is you should load AMP.js library from the AMP CDN. So here, as you can see, we have created a script tag and we are loading this library asynchronously. So this is a must-have for creating the AMP HTML page. You should add a link to your non-AMP version of the page or a 4.0 So in case your browser is not supporting the AMP and your user is trying to load your AMP page, it should be redirect to your non-AMP version or a 4.04 page that says that this page is not available in the normal format. It should specify the responsive viewport, and it should have a CSS boilerplate code. So CSS boilerplate code is nothing but a code provided by, this code is available on the amp.dev website where you can find it out. So this is the inline CSS implementation of your AMP application. Boilerplate has certain amount of code comes when you are adding it. The other CSS style which you want to apply, you can add it inside that, but make sure that it should be inline. No external CSS are allowed in your AMP page. Everything should be inline. So these are the must-haves for creating the AMP HTML page. And when you follow all the steps, this is how. The other option for creating the AMP page is you must ensure that your AMP page is discoverable, and this is how we will do it. As we have mentioned that we have to add a link to non-AMP page and an AMP page in your HTML so that your browser can identify it as an AMP, and if your browser doesn't support AMP, then it should redirect to the non-AMP page. So this is what makes your page discoverable in AMP cache, which is the Google cache, so it can be cached and next time it will be served from the cache. And once you follow all the steps and all the prerequisites for creating the AMP HTML, this is how your AMP page will look like. So as you can see, we have begun the AMP HTML with, we have begun the page with HTML AMP tag. We have head tag. The first tag inside the head is meta, which is specifying the UTF-8 encoding char set. Then we have a title. Then we are providing the canonical link, which specifies the regular HTML version of your page. Then we are specifying the meta viewport. Then we are adding the AMP boilerplate style with inside the NoScript tag, so it is inline. And then we are adding the AMP JavaScript link, and then we have body and closing HTML tag. So this is how your new AMP HTML page will look like when you are creating a new page. Next, okay, as we all know, AMP is something which is new and you want to create it, but what about your existing HTML page? You have your website, and now if you have to build it from scratch, so that is again a lot of work. So if you want to convert your HTML page to AMP page, these are the some steps which you have to follow. Step number 1, include AMP.js library inside your head tag. So this is a must-have, because if you don't specify this, your AMP HTML will not work. It will not be rendered. Second step, include char set. Most of the time we have this in website, but still, if it's not there, then you can add that. Include the canonical link. Of course, as we have said, you have to make your page discoverable. In that case, you have to add this canonical link for your non-AMP page. You have to specify the AMP attribute, because as we know that we normally in web application, we normally start with the HTML tag and we have to convert it to the AMP HTML tag. Next, we have to specify the viewport. So as we have seen that this is the required parameter for creating the AMP HTML. Next is convert your external style sheet to the inline. So here, this is how you can do that. You can add a style tag and a specify attribute AMP custom. So this is the tag provided by AMP framework for having your inline CSS, and whatever the CSS you have in your external style sheet, you can edit over here inside this tag so that it is rendered inline. Exclude all the third-party JavaScript. Uh, if you have any third-party JavaScript, you can comment it out, and still if those third-party JavaScript are required for your page, this is how you can do. You can use the AMP script tag, and inside that you provide your source for your JS file, which is again loaded asynchronously. Inside that script file, if your script is manipulating the DOM or changing the DOM, that DOM element you can specify inside the AMP script. So when it is loaded, it will just affect that particular part of your page. You have to add AMP CSS boilerplate. Okay, this is just an example. In case if you have a lot of images in your AMP in your non-HTML non-AMP HTML page, to convert it to the AMP HTML, you have to replace all your image tag with AMP image, and then just like this, if you have any other non-AMP tag which you would like to convert, you can convert. So we'll see in the AMP catalog what all the tags are available. You can go through it, and then you can just use it according to your requirement. Okay, now here comes the important part of the session. What if you already have existing PWA and you want to leverage the power of AMP inside your progressive web application? Because normally what happens is that whenever we have a progressive web application, it does the same thing. It is normally the single page application, and inside all the HTML page we have some API calls, and that gives you some JSON data, and then we just use that JSON data to render our HTML and all kind of stuff. So if you want to convert your existing PWA and you want to leverage the power of AMP, there are some ways you can do that. So this is the first way. Use the AMP as a data source. So when we say data source, that means, okay, so when we say data source, that means in your PWA, whatever the single page application you have, you use AMP to load that HTML, and then you can just reuse it. So let's say in your PWA you have 5 HTML page, and you have a anchor tag. On click of that, you load the other HTML page and display it in your PWA. What you can do is that you can use AMP as a data source. What it does is that it loads your HTML page and it caches that, so that next time when you are loading or when you are clicking on the same link, it will provide it from the cache. So all your HTML will come in as a data, and then you can just re-render it. So for that, these are the steps you have to follow. First is include shadow AMP. So shadow AMP is one of the component available in the AMP framework. This is the link which you can add in your PWA page. Then the second code is to check whether your AMP shadow is ready. So once your AMP shadow is ready, it will be available in your window object, which is window.amp, and then you can use it to render a page. So here what we are doing is that we are using amp.attach_shadow_doc, which is the method of your AMP shadow, and we are adding a container, we are specifying a doc, and we are specifying the URL. So what it does is that it will fetch your HTML from that particular URL, and then it will re-render it inside the container. So this is how you can use AMP as a data source for your progressive web application. Another option for integrating AMP to PWA is to preload PWA with the AMP page. So what it does is that it will make AMP HTML as an entry point for your progressive web application. So what it does is it will load first page of your PWA as an AMP page, so that it will be loaded very faster and it will be cached. So next time whenever you are requesting your PWA main page again, it will reload it from the cache, and this is how it will boost up your performance. So for that, what you can do is that just like the normal service worker of PWA, AMP is also providing you the service worker. So this is how you can use the service worker. This is the script tag which you have to add it in your HTML page, which is AMP install service worker, and it will add the service worker, and then the other tag which is AMP install service worker, which is the component of AMP. Here inside you can specify your service worker. So what it does is that it will install the service worker, and next time when you are requesting any of the page, it will be through that particular request will be through service workers. So the rest of the portion will be done by your service worker. As we know that in service worker we can specify the HTML, JS, CSS images that should be cached. So what it does is that here what we are doing is that we are using AMP service worker to make sure that all your resources, all your progressive web applications resources are cached, and all the request or all the navigation of your web pages are going through the service worker, so that whenever you are requesting a next page, it will be through the service worker as well as through AMP. And this is how you can integrate AMP in your progressive web application. Okay, now let's quickly see some of the AMP component catalog. Here I have mentioned some of the brief or some of the well-known AMP component which are available in the catalog. Full list is available on the amp.dev website. There you can see all kind of AMP component are available in the catalog, and you can use it as and when it is required. So first is for the advertising and analytics. As we have seen that we will see this in the later session for today, how you can create blazing fast ads, newsletters, email by using the AMP. So for that, when you are building it, these are some of the component which you can use, like AMP ad, AMP analytics. If you want to have a sticky ad, AMP pixel, AMP social share. These are the inbuilt component available in the AMP framework, which you can straight away use inside your application for creating the rich user interface. Another one is the dynamic content. So let's say you want to display a list, or you want to add some script, or you want to have some web push notification, user notification, live list. So this is for the dynamic content. These are some popular component available for the dynamic content. Full list, as I mentioned, available on the amp.dev website. There you can see all the kind of catalogs. Third one is the layout. So as we understood that whenever we are creating a web page, or whenever we're creating a web application, the responsiveness is what is required. And for that, there are some default layouts component available in the AMP framework, which is the accordion. You do have the support of iframe, AMP layout, AMP sidebar. So using this, you can nicely create your AMP application, and you can have the layout as per your wish and as per your requirement. Third one is AMP media. So AMP image, as we already seen the previous example when we were mentioning to convert your existing HTML to AMP. AMP image tag you can use. Then we have AMP animation. AMP animation is only using the GPU accelerated animations. Then we have the rich player that is used for creating the player inside your application. AMP video, AMP YouTube. So these are some inbuilt component or tags available with the AMP framework for having the media in your application. Then the presentation. You can have some component like AMP animation, using which you can do some animations, font, date display, date countdown, time go. There are a lot of such component available for having the presentation in your AMP application. Then we have AMP component social. So let's say you want to give a Twitter share or Twitter link button, or your AMP or your Facebook like or Facebook page, or any other social media like Vine, GFI Cat, Instagram. All kind of social media are supported in the AMP, and you can use all your tags inside your AMP component. Yeah, so that is pretty much about this session. Hope it is informative for you guys, and now you can start working and start building your AMP application, and it is really cool. So try it out, and thank you for watching the session, and hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.